I'm the principal business development manager for what is essentially a sustainability consultancy. I sector specialism in food and drink, although I've spent 15 years in the environmental sector generally looking at waste management and energy. It's brilliant being in Brussels today. It's actually my first time in Brussels, and it was my first time in the Eurostar as well, which was really, really exciting. But I'm not sure it's as exciting as these two carrot soups, to be honest. I'm going to prove that in the next 10 minutes, okay? So we'll start out with a vote because we all hate being asked to put our hands up in these things. I've got a tin of soup here and I have a plastic tub of soup. Hands up those of you who think the carbon footprint is higher for the tin of soup. Brilliant. No one's put their hand up. Who thinks it's higher for the plastic tub of soup? Quite a few. Those of you who didn't put your hand up, I'm hoping to prove in the next 10 minutes which has the higher carbon footprint. So we'll tell that through a tale of two soups through an LCA, which is a life cycle analysis. I'll explain what that is in a second. These two soups are the same in terms of what's inside, largely, both from a well-known UK retailer. There are some slight differences which we'll touch on in a second, but which is better, tinned or tubbed? I'm sure we'd all love a steamy hot bowl of soup today. I wish I'd thought of the tale of two salads or two sausages given today's barbecue setting, but here we are with these hot soups. And we're going to use an LCA to tell the story between the difference. It is pleasing, of course, that consumers are starting to use their knowledge, their increased knowledge around food and drink, sustainability, packaging particularly, to inform their decisions. And that was actually a feature of the work we've done recently for Food Drink Europe, which I suspect is part of the reason why we're invited today, but thanks, Will. So what did we do for Food Drink Europe, just really quickly? We took a snapshot of the food and drink sector in Europe as a whole, which gave us some pretty interesting insights. So, for example, the food and drink sector actually contributes 11% of all the emissions in Europe, which is quite a staggering figure. It's actually the same figure as the entire of Belgium. So we have a whole country's worth of emissions from one sector. And 70% of those emissions were actually made up by just 5 countries. I'm sure we could all have a pretty good guess as to which 5 countries those would be. So back to the soup. I've got 2 young kids, they're 6 and 3. They've sort of got an idea of what I do for a living, which is brilliant. It's also quite annoying around the dinner table when they start asking me lots of difficult questions about food sustainability. And that brought us to the story of these 2 soups. We can tell the story through a life cycle analysis. So what's a life cycle analysis? It is the entire carbon footprint from creation to disposal of a product or service. And we'll do that for these 2 carrot soups. The process, of course, for the carrot soup is quite intense. We have to do the farming part. We've got to go get the carrots. And I know we've got lots of farming talks today, which is great. We have to cook the carrots. That uses lots of heat, which is a significant part. That actually featured in the Food Drink Europe work too, and wider in that you can create quite low ambient temperatures for food processing directly from renewable technologies of around 60 to 80 degrees C. And you can use that as part of this carrot soup processing directly from solar. And we should start to see more of that in food processing. We then have to get the carrots to the manufacturers. The manufacturer turns the carrots and the water, which is we use a lot of water, which factors into the LCA. Salt, the packaging, the tin packaging, the plastic packaging, that's factored into the LCA too. And then, of course, it's got to find its way to the retailer, so the transport element. We all then drive to the supermarket and choose our favourite soup. There's an aspect there of the transport of us to the supermarket. We take it home, and then we make our choices about how we cook it on a hob, in a microwave, and then how we dispose of the packaging. Then there's the food waste to consider too. And did we do that properly? And then how did we recycle the packet that we took home? The 2 soups are largely the same. There's 600 grams of soup in the plastic tub and only 400 grams of soup in the tin, but this is where we get to where the striking differences are. So the carbon footprint of making the tin container is 3 times higher than that of the plastic tub. A few raised eyebrows there for people who bet on the plastic tub, but this is where it starts to get bad for the plastic tub. The retail aspect of the LCA for the plastic tub is 5 times higher than that of the tin container. And that's because when we walk into supermarkets, we feel that cold blast of air around our ankles and shins. That is the cold air pouring out of the open-fronted refrigeration that I bought this plastic tub of soup from, which is not great, okay? And that has a pretty detrimental effect on the LCA for this plastic tub of soup. You're saying, Sam, that's all well and good, but what about the packaging aspect? And that's a fair criticism, so let's get to that, okay? So, good news for the tin again. 98% of this tin can gets recycled in the UK based on typical local government curbside collections. So well done to the tin, 98%. 2% of it that was left over goes to energy for waste. Bad news, plastic fans. It's not looking good for plastic tub again, okay? 48% of the plastic tub ends up in landfill, which is pretty startling given we're in 2022 and we've got all of the resources available to us. 2%, just like the tin, ends up in landfill, and only 50% of it is recycled. And worse news, still in the UK, of that 50%, a big bulk of it ended up overseas being recycled in places as far away as Malaysia. So it's not great, again, for our plastic friend here. There's other ways of testing and analysing LCAs. Retailers increasingly use pounds or euros to measure the LCA of a product. How much did it cost to get to shelf? And they can use that as a measure of an LCA. But that's driving change. I spoke about that, my cold chins in the supermarket. That is leading retailers to change the way they store and look after products. So increasingly supermarkets are using closed refrigeration units. That would have improved the carbon footprint of my plastic tub of soup by 60%. But that is not where I bought my plastic soup from, so we're not going to score that today. The other good news about changing to those refrigeration units is that they're better in terms of refrigerant leaks too. So that's another thing that can be avoided. So those are just a few scenarios, right? We haven't looked at how I cooked my soup on the hob or on the microwave. I haven't looked at, well, actually, some people eat soup cold, which is pretty gross, but that would need to factor into an LCA too, whether they didn't use any heat or not. And then how I washed the tub and how many times I reused the packaging, okay? So my wife will be insisting that I bring this back from Belgium back to the UK so she can put some other food in this for the next few weeks. So that's a great part of the LCA too. But what does it all really mean, okay? It's not looking good for plastic, okay? So my specific example is that in this scenario of the LCA, the tailored to soups, unfortunately, for plastic, it hasn't done particularly well. So I won't be putting plastic tubs of soup in my shopping basket again. But really with LCAs, the answer is it kind of depends. But product LCAs tell us when and where it depends. They tell us how much of a difference there is between two product LCAs. That's really useful data. And importantly, they tell us where the hotspots are. So if you're the manufacturer of this soup, you can see where you sit in somebody else's scope 3. And that's really important data in terms of supply chain. But for now, it's tin soup for me. And that's what's finding its way into my basket. What's next in terms of Food Drink Europe? We're going to look at how we operationalize some of the net zero transition plans that we wrote into that report, which you'll be able to see. And I'm sure LCA of food products will be featuring strongly in that report. I think it's important that they do. I haven't remembered all the data from our LCA, I'm sure, in the last 10 minutes. So if you want to see the data that sits behind the LCA of these two soups, we do have a two soups page on the Ricardo website. Please go and have a look. And if you're a real soup enthusiast, you can come and find me in the barbecue afterwards. I'll happily talk to you about it in more detail. Okay, thank you.